Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Lamed. The Mishnah mentioned that if someone finds a garment of someone else, and you're holding on to it until the friend comes and claims it, until you can find who the rightful owner is. So you're storing it away, a safekeeping for the person. Nevertheless, every so often you should bring out the garment and shake it out. Shotcha lesorka aval lo lichbodo, and you should do so for its own sake. It's good to ventilate it so it doesn't get all moldy and bad, and so you take it out every so often, shake it out, as long as you're doing it for the sake of the garment. But if you're doing it for your own prestige, you're having company over, and you want to bring out this fancy garment and put it out as a decoration for your party, then that is not proper. Then you're using something that belongs to someone else, and it's not allowed. Okay, now we ask, what if you're bringing out the garment for its own sake and for your own sake as well? In other words, let's say you're going to shake it out every 30 days, and it happened to be the 30th day here. This day is also a day that you're going to invite some friends over, and so since you're taking it out anyway to shake it out for its own good, so can you also get benefit from it and put it out in front of the guests on the same day? So can you get two in one? Is that permitted? Mai tashema shotcha lesorka lesorka in ha lesorko ulesorka la. Well, let's see. From the Mishnah, it says you can shake it out for its sake. That means only for its sake. But if it's for both, for its sake and for your sake, then not. So from that part of the Mishnah, it seems like it's not allowed. However, ema sefa, let's look at the continuation of the Mishnah. Avalo lichvodo, lichvodohu delaha lesorka ulesorko shapir dameh. Mishnah also says you cannot take it out for your own prestige. That means just for that it's not allowed. But if it's for both your own prestige, your own good, and for its good, then it would be permitted. Ela mehalek ala mishma mina. So we see from our Mishnah, we cannot infer either way, because if we focus only on the resha, it sounds like it's not allowed to do for both. But if you focus on the sefa, it sounds like if it's for dual use, then it is permitted. So you know what, the Mishnah just doesn't address this case. It's ambiguous on the matter. Let's try a different proof. Tashema lo yishtechenna lo al gabe mita velo al gabe magor lesorko. Al yishtechenna al gabe mita ve'al gabe magod lesorka. Nizdamnu lo orchim lo yishtechenna lo al gabe mita ve'lo al gabe magod ben lesorko ben lesorka. This braita teaches that one may not spread out a garment on a bed nor on a hanger if it's for your own sake, for the finder's sake. However, one can spread it out on a bed or on a garment for the sake of the garment. If guests come, then one may not spread it out, not on the bed and not on a hanger, whether it's for your own sake or for its sake. So you see here that it's not permitted for dual use is also not allowed. In other words, when guests are coming over, even if you're doing it for its sake, because it happens to be the 30th day, but guests are coming over, nevertheless, it's not allowed. So is this a good proof that for dual use it's not allowed? And the answer is not necessarily. Shanehatam de mikla kalila, imishum ayna, imishum gannabe. No, it's different there because taking it out in front of guests, that's the same as burning it. Well, how is it the same as burning it? Well, two reasons. Either aina, people are going to put their eye on it, like an evil eye, or you're going to show it off, and then thieves will say, oh, this guy has an expensive garment in his room over there, and they're going to break in later and take it. Did the rabbis believe in ayin hara? Well, there are sources in which they do, but you see, the point here is that they're going to be jealous of a person, right, and say, oh, well, look at this fancy thing he has. People, the guests, will think that's actually his, and showing off generally has negative consequences, like people coming and stealing something from you. So you can read these as together. It doesn't have to be a magical ayin hara. It could just be generating bad feelings of others, of jealousy towards the person. Okay, so here, the point is that the problem here specifically is bringing it out in front of guests. You should not show off wealth. It's not even your own wealth, it's someone else's, and that will cause the damage to the item itself, and therefore that's why it's not allowed. But what if it was not the guests over? Let's say you were bringing it out for its own good, and you also wanted to personally benefit from it while you're bringing it out and shaking it out anyway. You're gonna wear it. You're gonna put it out for yourself to look at. So from here, we don't know. We just only know here from that guess. You can't put it out in front of others. Tashema hichnisa le'rvaka vedasha keshera bishvil shetinak v'tadush pesula. The next proof is from seemingly a completely different topic of Igla Arufa. If there's a murder mystery, we find the closest city to where the body is, and then we bring a female calf and we break its neck there near that spot. And it says regarding that, Iglat Bakar asher lo ubad ba asher lo mashecha be'ol. That calf that they bring has to be one that was not put to work, that did not was not drawn in a yoke, didn't pull something, didn't pull a plow, did not do any work. Okay, there's a similar law for para aduma, but we can see this phrase here, lo ubad ba, that's said by Igla Arufa, is the key one for our purposes. So this Braita teaches, let's say you had such a calf, and you put it into a yoke just so that it would suckle. Right, so that's okay. You're doing it for the sake of this baby calf, to have it go and suckle. But in the end, on its own, it threshed with the cows. It was pulling a board on grain and causing it was threshing. That's still permitted to use for Igla Arufa, even though it did work. The owner did not intend for it to do work. The owner only put it into the yoke so that it would suckle. Now, bishvil shetinak v'tadush pesula. But if the owner had in mind, when he put it into a yoke, that it would both suckle and also thresh, well then, the owner knowingly worked the animal, and then it no longer can be used for an Igla Arufa. Now, in this case, we see that it's being used both for the owner's sake and also for the calf's sake. So it's a combo. Nevertheless, it's no good. We can learn from here that a combo option does not save you, right? If even part of it is a problem, then the whole thing is a problem. And therefore, back to our case, if you bring out some garment for its sake to shake it out, but also you're getting benefit from it, similarly, it should not be good. So is this a good proof? No, the case of Igla Arufa is different. There, that has a special stringency because the pasuk says that it had not been worked. Ubad as a passive verb, not only if you didn't actively do it, even if it had not been worked, even if it had worked on its own, still, no matter what, in any case, it's prohibited. So there, because of a special stringency, if there was dual usage for its sake and for your own sake, that's why it's no good. But it could be in the case of a lost item where you're bringing it out anyway for its own sake. Maybe that would be okay. It doesn't have that pasuk that has a special stringency that Igla Arufa has. Now we ask, wait a second, if you're reading this ubad in the passive form to mean no matter how, if it did work, even if you didn't make it do work actively, if it did work, something happened to it that the calf did work even on its own, still it's prohibited. Then what about the resha? How come when the owner yokes it only in order to suckle, but it ends up working on its own, how come that's permitted? If you say that ubad, if it worked, then it's no good. Here it worked, even though it's on its own, it should also be no good. Halav damya ela lehaditnan shachan aleha of keshera ala aleha zachar pesula maitama. We have an answer, and the answer we can derive from the following Mishnah in Masechet Para. You see that we're comparing the Igla Arufa and the Para. If a bird landed on an animal, so now technically the bird is the animal's carrying the bird, but that animal can still be used for para aduma or for Igla Arufa because no one intended to put it there to make it work. However, if a male animal went and mounted this female, even though it's resting its weight on the female in order to procreate, then that is no good because it's carrying the other animal. Now we ask, what's the difference between a bird landing on it and a male animal resting on the female? And the first one is good and the second one's no good. Kidra papa damara papa iketib ubad v'karinan ubad hava mina fil memela v'iketib abad v'karinan abad hava mina ad de'abad behu ihu hashta dichtiv abad v'karinan ubad ba'inan ubad dumya de'abad ma abad nichale Af ubad de nichale. So the Papa explains this Mishnah, and through that will also explain the Braita above. His proof is based on the fact that the Pasuk says ubad, shelo ubad ba, and it's pronounced ubad, but really the proper way to spell ubad would be with a vav. That would make it clearer that it's ubad, ayin vav bet dalid. Without nikudot, which is how it appears in the Sefer Torah, if you just read it, it looks like the word avad. So avad meaning is a active verb. Ubad is a passive verb. So he's going to deal with that. If the pasuk was written with a vav and also read ubad as it is written, then I would say passively, any way that it worked, whether you wanted it to work or didn't want it to work, any work that it did would make it no good. Even if a bird went on it, that would make it pasul. But the pasuk doesn't say that. Now, if the pasuk was written avad, as it is written, and if we also read it avad, in other words, the kari was the same as the kativ, then I would have thought only if I actively make it work, only then is it no good. But any passive usage, if I didn't do it, like if the male is climbed on it, then that would be okay. So in either case, you would have said all passive or all active. But the pasuk doesn't do either of those. The pasuk writes it avad as an active verb, but we read it ubad as a passive verb. So that means the truth is somewhere in the middle. In order for it to be pasul, it has to be used in a way that is active. Just like if it's active, I want it to happen. So too, if I didn't actively work it, but I want it, it's good for me that it did such a thing. If I wanted it to happen, even if I didn't actively make it happen, but I'm happy that it did that, then also that would make it pasul. Okay, so we can use that principle to come back here. Regarding the bird, I really as the owner, I'm not interested in the bird landing on the animal. I don't care about it. I get no benefit from it. And so if the bird lands on it, even though it's carrying the bird, that's fine. I could still use it. Whereas the male mounting itself on the female, even though I didn't cause it, still the owner benefits from it, right? He's happy that this is happening, and therefore that makes it pasul. Same thing here. When he wants it to nurse, he wants this baby calf to nurse, to get bigger and grow, and he's not interested in it working. So that's why it's kasher. But if he is interested in it working, he says, oh, while you're nursing, also pull this threshing board, and he wants it to happen, even if he didn't actively make it happen, and he put it into the yoke primarily for nursing, but he also has in mind, it'll thresh too, then he's happy about that, then it's pasul. So it really has to do with the owner's state of mind, and so that explains it. But in any case, all that is a special law for Egla Arufa and Para Aduma. There is a special restriction that any work that it does, even if it's for dual use and the owner wants it to happen, that will make it pasul. But that is no proof for our case of a lost garment, and I'm taking it out for dual use. There we end up without a proof whether that is permitted or not. Mishnah said that if you have silver and copper vessels, you can use them for the benefit of the vessels. It's good to take them out and use them, light use every so often, but not for your own personal use. Tenor Banan Abraita is going to expand on these examples from the Mishnah. If you find wooden vessels, then you should use them so that they don't deteriorate. It's not good if you leave wooden vessels in the closet and don't use them. Bring them out, put some nuts in them, right? Use them. It's good. Copper vessels, put hot water in them, but don't put it directly on the fire. Putting on the fire is going to make them turn black, or it's going to erode them. But putting hot in them is good for it to expand and hold some hot water. Silver vessels, it's good to put cold food in them, but not hot food, because hot food will cause it to tarnish. If someone finds rakes or axes, it's good to use them to bang or rake soft things, but not hard things, because hard thing is going to damage them. It's going to make them lessen, maybe chip them, but for soft things it's good to get some use out of them to keep them going. However, gold and glass vessels, don't touch them at all, because they're very delicate. Any use was going to cause them damage. And the Baraita says what is true for a lost item is also true for a deposit. If an owner of a silver vessel gives you the item to hold, says, "Hey, can you hold on to this for me? I'm going away on a trip. Can you hold on to it?" Then that's the same thing. You can't use it for your own sake, but you should use it for its sake, and you should bring it out every once in a while. Put some cold food in it or cold drink in it, and that's actually good for the vessel. Pikadon mai abidite gabe. Now we ask, what would the pikadon, that this deposit, be doing with the shomer for so long? If it belongs to the owner, so typically it will be up to the owner to come and take it back when it's time for it to be used. The shomer typically doesn't have to take care of it and bring it out and use it. It's usually a short term. Here, hold on to this for a few days, and then the owner should come and take it back, or should come and take care of it if it needs maintenance. Amar Rav Ada bar Chama Amar Rav Sheshat Bepikadon shelchu ba'alehen lemidinat hayam. And so Rav Sheshat explains, this is a deposit where the owner went overseas and he went away for a long time, and maybe he thought he was going to come back sooner, whatever, or he knew he was going to go away for a long time, and says, "Can you watch this for me?" So therefore, the shomer has to take care of it, just like a finder would take care of something, which includes bringing it out, airing it out, or using it as appropriate for the good of the vessel. Masa sak o kupa b'chol davar she'en darko litol, harei ze lo yitol. The Mishnah taught that if someone sees a sack or a basket or some item that's lost, and it's not in the typical manner of that finder to carry such a thing. Let's say it's a big giant box, and this person he's not a mover. He doesn't usually carry around big boxes with a hand truck or a forklift, or carry these heavy things. And if it's beneath his dignity, then he does not have to take it. He could just leave it there for someone else to come along and take it and return it. Menahane mile. What is the source for this law in the Mishnah? Tetanu Rabbanan. V'it alamta, pa'amim she'ata mit'alem, u'pa'amim she'i ata mit'alem. It's from this pasuk that says, don't see your brother's ox or sheep going astray, vit alamta mehen, and hide from them. Now a simple reading is this is all part of the law. Do not look at someone else's animal, right, being lost and ignore it. Rather, don't ignore it, return it to the person. And the same phrase comes up in the next, in two Pesukim later, lo tuchal hit'alem, do not ignore it. All right, so in the simple Peshat, it just starts and ends with do not ignore. It's very easy for a person to just, I don't want to know about it, just make believe they don't see it. Generally, most people, like, once you have it in your hand, okay, you're going to feel guilty. I better go return it to the person. But most people would justify, I just don't want to make it my business. It's such a pain. You find someone's animal, and they have to take it home and feed it and shear it and find the person and go and announce it and go 3 times to Jerusalem and wait there for 7 days. So the pasuk has to therefore say, do not ignore it. Now, even though the simple reading is do not ignore it, nevertheless, you could read it with a comma here. Don't just see your neighbor's animal lost and then period. V'italamta mehen, you should ignore it, right? And so since you could read, I mean, it's not the natural reading, but since the word v'italamta is far away from the law, you could read it on its own as saying you should ignore it, even though this says lo tuchal lihitalem. So we learn from this fact that sometimes you are permitted to ignore it, and sometimes you are not permitted to ignore it. Now, which cases? Hakesad, haya kohen vehi bebet hakebarot, o she'azaken ve'ena lefi kebodo, o she'eta melacha shelo, meruba mishel chavero lekach ne'emar v'italamta mehen. There's three cases where a person is allowed to ignore an item that's lost. If a person is a kohen and he sees someone's animal that's lost in a cemetery, does the kohen have to go into the cemetery, violate prohibition of becoming tameh in order to fulfill this mitzvah of returning an item? And the answer is no, he does not. It's more important. The law of not becoming tameh is more important, as the Gemara will say. Or if a person was elderly, and even if physically he could lift this thing or pull this animal, he's a distinguished person, and it's not according to his dignity to have to be pulling this goat along and feeding it and taking care of it. Or if a person is he's a lawyer, a fancy lawyer, he makes $1,000 an hour. Now, if he sees on his way to his law office on Fifth Avenue, he sees a goat that got stranded in the middle of Manhattan, and he says, "Oh, this goat must have been gotten lost from some farm in New Jersey." And so he takes the goat, and he has to go get a pickup truck, and he takes it and feeds it and shears it until he drives to that farm, and it takes him 2 hours. Okay, so that's $2,000 of billable hours that he took out of his day. So then what? He's going to go back to the guy who lost it and says, "Okay, here's your goat. The goat's worth $100. Oh, you have to pay me $2,000 for my time lost." So in that case, no, he should not do that. He can ignore it because his job is worth more than the value of the thing of the item that was lost. Okay, so in all these three cases, in order to teach me that these people are allowed to ignore the item, that's why it says v'italam tamehen, ignore it. You're allowed to disregard it. This is actually the against the pashat of the pasuk, but the point is the rabbis recognize that they have to be practical, and sometimes it doesn't make sense for such a person to stop what he's doing and return the item. Now, lemay istaricha kera. This pasuk v'italam tamehen. For which of these cases do I actually need a pasuk? Peshita. Hai aseh v'hai lo ta'aseh v'aseh v'la te'aseh v'dache et lo ta'aseh v'aseh. If the pasuk is coming to teach us regarding the kohen, that he's not allowed, he does not need to, and actually should not, go into a cemetery to retrieve a lost item, that's obvious, because the obligation to return an item is misvat aseh, as the pasuk says, hashev teshivem, and the prohibition for a kohen to go into a cemetery is a lo ta'aseh and also an aseh, right? It says he shall not defile himself, and also kedoshim tiyu, he has to remain holy, and therefore one aseh is not going of returning an item is not going to have the power to override a lo ta'aseh and aseh. So therefore, I don't need a pasuk of avit alamta in order to tell me that a kohen does not have to retrieve an item in a cemetery. Furthermore, we're not going to override a prohibition of becoming tameh for a monetary matter, right? These are two separate realms, and if it was two prohibitions, one isur and another isur, then maybe, okay, you'd say, this isur would override that one, but a monetary matter is not going to override a prohibition. So we don't need the pasuk for kohen. Ela l'shelo merubeh mishel chavero, med Rav Yehuda amarav nafka, damar Rav Yehuda amarav efes. Ki lo yeh becha ebyon, shelecha kodem l'shel kol adam. The case of the lawyer whose time is more valuable than the lost item itself, right? If someone's time is worth more than this item that his friend lost, that also, I don't need the special pasuk because I can learn it from the teaching of Rav, where Rav, quoting the pasuk, make sure that there should not be any needy among you. The pasuk in Devarim that says, take care of the poor, so that eventually, hopefully, we can eradicate poverty. We learn from there that your assets take precedence over the assets of any other person. We learn from here is that you should not give away all of your money to help the poor, even though it's good to help the poor, because then you will become poor yourself and be a charity case. So if all you have is one sandwich and you need it because you're hungry, don't give it to someone else who is also hungry, because then you won't have it. So if you have a choice, then keep it for yourself. You should give charity, give from a money that you don't need yourself to live, that give away, but don't give away everything so that you become a charity case. The point is that your own interests have to take precedence over the interests of other people. Not your luxuries, right? It doesn't mean that you can buy a third luxury house because I need that rather than feed poor people, but it means your basic necessities, yours is more important than someone else's. So we can derive from here the same point that if your job is making $1,000 an hour, then that is going to take precedence over losing out all that money for your friend whose item is worth less than that. So therefore, we already can figure out that principle. Ella lezaken ve'no lefi kebodo. Rather, we do need the pasuk v'olam tamehen for an elderly person. Even if he physically could lift this box and bring it to the person who lost it, but if it's beneath his dignity, that's why it says v'italamta. You have an exemption. You can ignore it and let someone else return it. Amar Rabba, hikisha hayav ba. When is a person obligated to return an item? Once he moves it. Let's say it's an animal and he strikes it and he hits it and makes it move, then he already has acquired responsibility for it, and then he has to return it. You can't then ignore it and say, oh, I didn't mean to move this thing. No, once you do that, you're responsible, and now you have to take it home and find the owner. Abaye havayativ kamed rabba. Chazal lahanach izeh dekamaihu. Shekal kala ushta behu. One time Abaye was sitting in front of Rabba, his teacher, and there was some goats nearby. He picked up some dirt and threw it at them, and then the goats moved. Rabba said, oh, now you're responsible for them. Amar le itchayebu behu kum ahadzinu. Get up and go return them to their owner. You made them move, right? Now you bought it. You acquired ownership. You don't own them. You acquired responsibility to return it. Question: what if a person, it's his way to carry these big bundles and things in a field, but not in the city? When he's out in the field, right, he's in his overalls and he's in work mode, it's within his dignity. But in the city, he dresses nice and he doesn't carry big bundles of things in the city. What about that person? Is it beneath his dignity or within his dignity because he acts different ways in different places and different times? On the one hand, you could say, we need a person who can fully return it, no matter what the circumstances. And this person, since it's not his way to carry these big things in a city, so he's exempt everywhere. Or should we say that this person, it's within his dignity to carry this item in the field, and once he's obligated somewhere, so he'll be obligated everywhere, even in the city. And we leave this question unanswered. Amar Rava, kol shebeshelo machazir, beshel chavero name machzir, v'chol shebeshelo porek v'to'en, beshel chavero name porek v'to'en. Rava gives a good rule of thumb to figure out if this is beneath my dignity or within my dignity. Anything that he would recover his own item. If you lost an item, would you go back and retrieve it? Then, if it's your friends, you also have to retrieve it. And the same is true for the law of unloading and loading someone else's animal. If it was your animal and this stuff all fell off of your animal, you would go and put it back on. Well, then, if you see your friend who has an animal the burden fell off, then you have to go and help him as well. On the other hand, if it's beneath your dignity, let's say in the case of the animal, right, he has to go and pick up all the straw, and if it was your own, you wouldn't bother to do it, right? You'd be like, oh, you know what, it's not within my dignity, I'm just going to leave the straw here. In that case, you don't have to help your friend either. Would you fix your own tire? If it's not within your skill set or your dignity to fix a tire, and if I got a flat tire myself, I wouldn't fix it. I would call AAA or shomrim to come and fix it for me. Well, in that case, if I see someone else on the road that has a flat tire, I don't have to stop for them. I could just roll down my window and say, hey, maybe call AAA. You need the number? You need to borrow a phone? I don't have to help someone else if I wouldn't do it for myself. And the same thing with a lost item. If I had some change and fell out of my pocket, right, and there's some nickels and pennies on the floor, would I pick them up if they were my own? I might not. I don't want to scrounge around on the sidewalk in the middle of Manhattan picking up pennies. I would just leave them there. If so, then if you see someone else drop some pennies, or you see some pennies and you want to know, I'll have to go return it to someone. If it's beneath your dignity to pick them up for yourself, then you don't have to pick them up for someone else either. Well, it might be nice to help someone out, but the point is that if it's a lost item and you would leave it there, then you don't have to pick it up for someone else either. Rabbi Yishmael b'Rabbi Yosef hava kazil be'urcha, paga be'ahu gavra, hava dare patcha de'ufe. Otbin hu veka mitpach. Amar le deleli. Amar le kama shavin. Amar le palga dezuza. Yehebe palga dezuza ve'afkera. A great story about Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef. He was walking on the road. Someone encountered him, and he was carrying a burden of sticks of wood. And this guy put down the wood, and he was resting. Okay, now the guy wants to get up again and keep traveling, but it's hard for him to get the wood on his shoulder while he's already standing up. So he needs someone to help load the wood up on him. He needs someone to bend down, pick up the wood, and put it on the guy's shoulder. So he tells Rabbi Ishmael, right, do me a favor and lift these up and help me out. So Rabbi Ishmael, it's beneath his dignity to do so. Rabbi Ishmael would not pick up sticks from the floor on his own. He's a respected elderly person, and so it really would be within his right to just say, no, it's not beneath my dignity. But Rabbi Ishmael is a nice person. He doesn't want to do that. So instead he says, how much are these worth? He says half of a zuz. So Rabbi Ishmael takes that half a zuz and pays him for it, right? Instead of me carrying them, picking them up for you, I'll pay you the value of the zuz. I'll buy them from you. And the guy is very happy, right? So now these are mine, and I don't have to pick them up for you. Now, Rabbi Ishmael didn't actually want these pieces of wood, so he makes it hefker. He just leaves it there. Anybody who wants can come and take it. Okay, what does this guy do? Hadar zacha behu. This guy says, oh, they're hefker? Oh, I claim them for myself. Now, hadar yaheble palgad zuzav afkera. Now again, he goes to Rabbi Ishmael and says, oh, now these are mine again. Can you help me put them, load me up and put them on my shoulder? Rabbi Ishmael says, and listen, it's still beneath my dignity. You know what? How much are they worth? Another half a zuz? Here's another half of a zuz. He buys them again, and again he makes them hefker. Now this is going to go around and round forever. Rabbi Ishmael sees that the guy is about to go and reclaim them once again. So Amaleh lekula ama afkaranhu velach la afkerinhu. Rabbi Ishmael says, I am making them ownerless with regard to everybody else in the world except for you. You cannot reclaim them, right? You don't have a right to. And therefore, right, you have to go on your way. You got paid twice already for the wood, right? That's it. Go home. And someone else will come along who is able to lift them, and they'll take it. Now we ask, can you make something hefker to everybody, to everyone in the world except one person? This is subject to machloket. Bet Shammai says you can say this is ownerless for poor people only. You can make that stipulation, so then only poor people will come and take it. But Bet Hillel says that doesn't make any sense. It's not hefker unless it's hefker for everyone. Ownerless means literally ownerless, so it has to be available for everyone, just like in Shemitah year. In the Shemitah year, right, your field, you have to let anybody come. You can't restrict your field and say, only poor people can come and take things from my field. Ownerless means absolutely ownerless. You have no right to decide who comes and takes it or not. And therefore, how did Rabbi Ishmael have a right to say it's ownerless for everyone except for you? Can't do that according to Bet Hillel. Ela Rabbi Ishmael Rabbi Yosef lekula ama afkerinhu b'milata be'almahu deokmeh. But in fact, Rabbi Ishmael legally made it ownerless for everyone, and therefore even that guy who was carrying it technically could have taken it, but he was just saying words, just a mere statement to prevent him, like, hey, not so fast, I don't want you to take it. Really, the guy could have, but this was Rabbi Ishmael saying, listen, I'm not going to pay you again, right? That's it. I paid you twice. You got what you needed. It's beneath my dignity, right? Be happy and stop doing this reclaiming. Okay, Rabbi Ishmael but Rabbi says Zaken ve'eno lefi kevodo hava. Now we ask Rabbi Ishmael, why did he even have to pay him? He was an elderly person, a respected person. He could have just said, sorry, this is beneath my dignity. I would not pick up sticks for myself, and therefore I don't have to pick them up for you. The answer is Bishmael, but Rabbi said, he was acting beyond the letter of the law. He could have simply just refused and walked away, but he was a nice person, and he wanted to help out this guy, not help him so much by bending down, but help him by paying him, which is even better. Where was he going? To sell it on the market? Good, you got your money here. So he was able to make him happy. Tetaneh Rav Yosef, v'hoda'ata lehem ze bet chayehem. We're going to learn the value of going beyond the letter of the law from this derasha, beautiful derasha on Pasuk in Shemot, that says, Moshe, you should go and teach them, hoda'ata lehem, teach Bnei Israel. We're going to atomize this Pasuk. Every phrase refers to another thing. Hoda'ata lehem means teach them a livelihood. Very important for a person to know how to make a living. Et haderech zo gemilut chasadim asher yelchu ze bikur cholim ba zo kibura vet ha'maseh ze hadin asher yasun zo lifnim mishurat hadin. The way, that's a way of gemilut chasadim. Moshe, teach Bnei Israel the way of doing kind deeds, and that they should walk in. That's visiting the sick. Ba, and it is the value of burying someone. And ba'aseh is the law. Asher yasun, that you should do, is doing things beyond the letter of the law. So we see from here that doing things beyond the letter of the law is a very important value. We're going to analyze that. Derasha amar mor asher yilchu ze bikur cholim hanu gemilut chasadim. Why do you need a separate phrase to teach me visiting the sick? Isn't that included in acts of kindness? The answer is ben gilo. Damar mor ben gilo notel echat mishishim bechol yo va'afilu achi miba'eh le lemezal gabe. This comes to include someone who is a contemporary, literally the same age, but this seems to be referring to an astrological idea that people that are born under the same constellation are susceptible to the same illness. And therefore, you might have thought that if someone is born under the same constellation, we know that when you go visit someone, you take away a 60th of their sickness. Not literally, a 60th means a small amount. It's a way of saying you relieve the person of a little bit of their sickness. But by relieving it, it also means that the visitor might get it. This is in general a concern when you visit someone. If it's a contagious disease, then you are risking yourself a bit. And if you're in the same, let's say, medical category of being susceptible to that disease, then it is a bit of a risk to go and visit the person. Don't come too close, wear a mask, whatever. So anyway, the point is that even if someone is ben gilo, nevertheless, you have to go visit him. And even if that means that you're going to take away some of the sickness yourself, right, do the person a favor and go visit him. So that's a special gimilut chasadim. Normally, you don't have to put yourself in danger. But for bikur cholim, this, anyway, not you still should put yourself in danger, but this amount of, a small amount of danger that you may get, as a possibility, you may get a tiny amount of sickness, still, it's valuable enough that you should go and visit someone. Ba zo kebura, hainu gimilut chasadim, lo yisrael zaken ve'no lefi kebodo. Why do I need another word to teach me that it's mitzvah to go and bury someone? Isn't that included in acts of kindness? And the answer is to include an elderly person that's not beneath his dignity. Normally, this elderly person is not going to go shovel dirt. But if it's for the mitzvah of a burial, then it's not, even though he's an elderly person who wouldn't normally shovel dirt, he should go, and this is an act of kindness that he's obligated to do, and help and bury someone. Asher ya'asun zo lifnim mishrat hadin. Damar Rabbi Yochanan, lo charba Yerushalayim ela ad she'al shedanu ba din Torah. Ela dineh demagizta ledayano, ela ema she'ha'emidu dinehem al din Torah, velo abdu lifnim mishrat hadin. Now it says Asher ya'asun, that means that you should act beyond the letter of the law. Go the extra mile. How do you know that that's important? Because Rabbi Yochanan said, why was Jerusalem destroyed? Because they did a judgment of Torah. What does that mean? What, they should have done a judgment of the magistrates, follow Roman law? They should have followed Roman law instead of Torah law? No, that's not the contrast. Rather, it means that they were very strict in their decisions, and everybody said, oh, I need from the last inch and the last penny, right? They'd sue everyone to the max, and they weren't forgiving and merciful. Rather, a person should always go beyond the letter of the law and say, even though I don't have to pay, even though I don't have to help you, you know what? I want to be generous and go beyond the letter of the law. And because everybody was being very strict in their justice, that's why the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, which is a very important lesson, right? Even if a person is right, just being technically right doesn't always mean that that's the best thing to do, because if everybody stands for their principles absolutely and won't budge and won't compromise and won't be generous, then it's very difficult for a society to be sustainable. Next Mishnah, Ezohi Aveda, Masa Chamor o Parado in Baderech, Enzo Aveda, Chamor vechelav hafuchin, Paravra Sabena Keramim, Harezo Aveda. What is considered a lost item if one sees a donkey or a cow that are grazing on a path? That's not a lost item. It makes sense. That's the owner put them there to graze, and then he went to do something else. But it doesn't mean it's lost. It's normal for these animals to be grazing on the path. However, if he sees a donkey and the vessels that it's carrying are flipped over, or he sees a cow running through vineyards, destroying things, then obviously the owner doesn't know about it, because the owner wouldn't leave his donkey with the merchandise all flipped over like that, or allow a cow to run loose in between the vineyards. If someone's animal was lost and you returned it, and then it ran away again and you returned it again, and it ran away again, even 4 or 5 times, you have to return it every time, even though it's obvious the owner is not very good at keeping his animal in check. He keeps losing it, it keeps running away. Nevertheless, that's his problem. Your responsibility is to return it, as the pasuk says, Havshev Teshivem, a double language to teach that even if you have to do so many times. היה בטל מסלע, לא יאמר לו, תן לי סלע, אלא נותן לו שכרו כפועל. אם יש שם בית דין, מתנה בפני בית דין. אם אין שם בית דין, בפני מי יתנה, שלא קודם. If someone would lose a sela, a lot of money, if he was not working, like the lawyer that was making $1,000 an hour, so he cannot go to the guy who lost the item and says, you have to pay me for my job, which is a sela, or in the lawyer, $1,000 an hour. Rather, the finder does not have to pay him that much. The finder only has to pay him minimum wage, kipoel, like a day laborer, right, for his work. That's the law. The finder does not have to match that person's normal salary. However, if there's a bet din nearby, the finder can first go to the bet din and make a condition. Says, listen, I see a donkey out there that's lost. I will return it on condition that the finder has to pay me my usual wage of $1,000 an hour or whatever it is. And if there is no bet din, so then where can he stipulate? He cannot stipulate. In that case, his own interest takes precedence, and he does not have to return it. So that's the flow. We assumed this halacha before, but this is actually the source of it, that really he should take only minimum wage, unless he makes a stipulation. And if there's no bet din, then he's allowed to say, well, it's not worth my time. He doesn't have to go and lose a lot of money from his job in order to return an item. We ask, Atu kol haneda marinan lav avedahu. What is this opening? What is a lost item? We were just spent a long time, many mishnayot, describing lots of cases of lost items. Are none of those lost items? אמר רב יהודה, הכי כאמר, איזו היא כלל, אבדה שהוא חייב בה, מסע חמור ופרה רואים בדרך, אין זו אבדה ולא מחייב בה. חמור וחלב הפוכים פרה ורסה בין כרמים, הרי זו אבדה ומחייב בה. Rav Yehuda explains, the Mishnah was not saying that everything before was not a lost item, but rather, I wanted to know a principle. What's a principle by which you can evaluate what is a lost item that the owner doesn't know where it is, and what's an item that just the owner put there, he knows where it is, but he went away. So it wants to give you the general principle. Often, it's easier to define a principle by the negative, right? What is an aveda? And then it gives an example of what is not an aveda. And so that's exactly what it says. Here's the rule. If you find an animal that is grazing on the road, that's not lost. That makes sense that the owner wants it there and will come back for it. But if it's merchandise that's carrying is overturned, or it's running in the middle of vineyards, then obviously the owner does not know where it is, and you have to go and return it to him. We ask, Ula Olam, this grazing, how long? If you see it grazing, right, forever, you see it grazing for weeks and months at a time on the street, and you don't see the owner anywhere in sight day after day, you still assume that it's not a lost item? For how long? Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Ad Shelosha Yamim, 3 days. We assume an owner would bring put it out to graze and know where it is for 3 days. If you see it unattended for more than 3 days, then it must be a lost animal. Then we question this ruling of Rav. If you see it out at night, even for 1 hour, nobody leaves their animals out unattended at night. And so even for 1 hour, you say, this is a lost item. And if it's during the daytime, it might be even more. If this is nice grazing land, it could be that the owner will bring it and allow it to graze during the day for many more days than 3. La siricha dava chazila bekadmeta ubechashechta. Telatayo me'amrinan itra muye itra mela venafka. Rather, it's talking about a case where you see this animal grazing on the road very early in the morning, before sunrise, and you also see it at night, late at night. Now, for 3 days, it says it could happen that it goes out. Maybe it went out early, and the owner is okay with it, and maybe it stayed out later than usual, and the owner is okay with it. Right? It happens sometimes that the owner, maybe he doesn't come back till late and bring it in, but eventually he'll bring it in soon after it gets dark. That could happen for 3 days. But more than that, then obviously this is a neglected animal. There's nobody taking care of it. It's a lost one, and you have to go and get it. Tanya nemehachi, masat talit vekardom, be'isratia ufara v'rasa ben akeramim, harezo aveda. Talit besad gader, kardom besad gader, ufara ro'a ben akeramim, enzo aveda. Shelosha yamim ze achar ze, harezo aveda, ramayim sheshotfin ba'in, hareze goder bifnehem. We have a braita that backs up this law and this interpretation regarding the 3 days, because it says, if you find a garment or an axe in the middle of the street, or an animal that's running through the vineyards, that's lost property. No one leaves an expensive tool in the middle of the street or allows animals to run through vineyards. However, if you see a cloak on the side near a fence, or an axe along the fence, then it could be that the owner purposefully put it there for a while. He's going to come back for it. Don't take it. And if you see an animal that's grazing between the fields, that's normal. The owner would allow it to graze, not to run wild, but to graze. That's not a lost item. But if it's for 3 days, day after day, then that must be a lost item. If you see water rushing into someone's field and it's going to ruin the field, then you have to save the field by putting a barrier before it. So you see that the law of returning a lost item is not only movable items, also if the person will have lost property damage. You have to do something about that. Amar Rava, l'chol avedat achicha l'rabot avedat karka. And Rava, in fact, verifies this and brings a pasuk. A pasuk says, l'chol avedat. Any lost item, that includes not only movable items, but even a loss of land. You can't lose land, like you can't not know where it is. Right, the land is permanent, it stays. But you can lose land by it being suffering from damage. So if you see it going to be flooded, you have to go, and the owner is not around, you have to go and put a barrier. Amar le Rav Chananya le Rava, Tanya de Mesia lach, ra'a mayim sheshotfin ba'in, hareze goder bifnehem. So Rav Chananya says to Rava, oh, I know a braita that supports you. It's this braita that we just said. If you see water that's rushing towards someone's field, you have to put a barrier before it. So this is a good example. This is a good example. And when we read it, it looks like Rava is commenting on it. But actually, Rava said this separately about the pasuk. And so then Rav Chananya says, I know a braita. This supports what you just said, that lost items refer to land as well. Amar le'i mishum ha la tesayya'i. Rava said, thank you for trying to back me up, but actually, I don't think that braita is a backup. I believe my law is true. Obviously, he taught it. that you have to save someone's land, but this baraita is not necessarily a proof, because this baraita is talking about where there are sheaves of grain on the land, and the water that will come, it will ruin the sheaves. So these are movable items that you have to save by stopping, putting a barrier in front of the water. It's not saving the land, which is immovable, but rather the sheaves that are movable items. Now we ask, if there are sheaves, then isn't that obvious? This is the same as any other item that is a lost item that you have to return to the owner. And if it's going to be damaged, you have to take care of it. Oh, we're only talking about a case where the sheaves need the land in order to dry out. They need to stay out there because they're still wet. They're still not dried out yet. You have to dry them out completely to store them through the winter. And so because they need to be out on the land, I might have thought that since they need the land, they are like the land. And I might have thought that actually you don't have to save land. And since you don't have to save land, you don't have to save these sheaves that are on the land and need the land. And that's why the Baraita has to come and teach us, even though these sheaves require the land, still we consider them like movable objects, and you have to do whatever you need to do in order to save them. But there's not necessarily a proof from this baraita that, let's say there was no sheaves and the water would ruin the land. There's not necessarily from this baraita that you can prove that you have to save the land itself. Rava happens to think that you do have to, and he learns that from the pasuk. He's just saying that this baraita is not a proof either way. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen v'amen.